Welcome to this second episode of Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always, the show that reveals the lives, loves, and disappointments of groundbreaking researchers and academics. We'll spare none of the details and delve deep into what makes thinkers within our school tick. This series is brought to you by QUT's School of Public Health and Social Work. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Today on the show, we have three fabulous, much-loved lecturers and researchers from PHSW. And before we get rolling, I'll introduce them. First up, we have Dr Niki Edwards, a senior social work lecturer at PHSW and an advocate for diversity, inclusion, and gender equality. Before entering academia, Niki worked in health, disability, and human services for more than 2 decades. Her research brings together clinical, governmental, and academic perspectives to create a synthesised account for psychiatry, disability, and disadvantage. Jen Kaighin is a social work and human services lecturer at PHSW, and her research interests include queer theory and practice in social work and human services, critical youth work theory and practice, and basic income for young people. Before joining QUT, Jenny was a youth worker practitioner for 17 years in Queensland, Victoria, and the Northern Territory. She maintains her connection to the youth sector through her membership of management committees and networks and doing team and group professional supervision for youth work practitioners. Finally, Dr Julie-Carroll is a lecturer in public health, and we may get to chat a little later about some of the similar objectives of public health and social work. She lectures in the areas of women's health, international health, the social determinants of health, and sociology and health. Her research interests, while very broad, centre on inequality and digital media. Now, let's get started. The most important question first. What is your hot beverage, Niki? And what are you drinking it in?
I am having a coffee latte on skim milk, very, very hot. And it is quite a special mug, actually. It says a lot about me. If you look closely, it's a donkey. There are donkeys on it, and I have donkeys, real donkeys for self-care. And what's really nice about this cup is I actually got it in Erfurt in Germany from a co-op that young artists with disability run. So it's by a young woman with autism. This is her take on donkeys. So cheers.
Oh.
Jen, what about you?
Coffee. This time of the day, it's definitely coffee. If it were later in the day, maybe my glass would be wine glass shaped, but it's coffee. This being the cup, it has my name on it, so it doesn't get lost. It was given to me a lot of years ago when I gave up youth work and started working in direct practice and started working in council, and I didn't have to be in festy youth organisation kitchens trying to work out which cup might be the cleanest, and I got to have my own cup. And so this was a little celebration of that from a friend, and so it's come with me everywhere, and it's kind of got rainbow colours on it, which you know, is always a good thing.
Awesome. So are you the one putting up the nimity pimity signs in the kitchen? Yeah. Saying if this cup has Jenny written on it, don't touch it.
Oh no, I'm not passive aggressive like that at all. I don't go there.
I was asking that question quite ironically because you're the last person I'm doing that. Julianne, what about you? What's your cup? And
yes. My cup is a little less sexy, but I love it just as much, and it is. See, it's got my lipstick mark, which is a trademark of every time I've drunk everything, there's lipstick on it. And it's my Mum in a Million, which is a tacky little Mother's Day present. But it's from one of my children. I don't remember which. But I think the important thing is that it's from my kids, and they're my favourite thing in the world.
So what about this idea of like your identity as a mum and identity as a scholar? Do they ever sort of conflict?
Wow. That's a good question. I think happily no, because I had my children quite young. And so, I mean, my third child was very much part of my PhD. So we've all grown up together, you know, the study, the kids and me have kind of evolved together and all been part of it. And I think one of the very cool things about university life and academia is that is the flexibility. And so my kids have kind of always been part of my working life. Is, you know, I had them as babies in lectures with me, and what I'm teaching sort of very much comes home and becomes part of our discussion. So no, I think it's a happy little mesh between career and kids and identity. Not an uncomfortable or dichotomous one.
And as I was listening to you, I was thinking about a very favourite photograph I have of my daughter. And she would have been probably 18 months, still wearing a nappy, and her little brother. And she had a pair of glasses on. She had a book, and the book says The Politics of Government, and my briefcase.
Yeah.
Kids,
that's how it was. Yeah.
You're playing cowboys and Indians, or, you know, mummies and daddies or doctors, but my kids always played going to university. But I also got I think it's an interesting question, Naomi, because I do have a sad story to tell. I'm a late career researcher who did my PhD after I had 5 children, and I have a very sad memory about my thesis. One day my Dominic, one of my boys, picked up my thesis, and he was in my lounge room and he was laughing. He said, here's the birthday party that you missed. Here's the final of the cricket match you couldn't come to. And he went through it, and he's a very gentle boy with a gentle soul. But I do have to say, doing the thesis was tough. Mm-hmm. It did have ramifications for family life. But
sure.
I think that when I introduce myself to my students, I always say to them, I have learned just as much from parenting, being in a relationship for 35 years as I have from my academic qualifications. It's about life. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty interesting. So what I'm hearing is that there's no kind of, I guess, division. There's a fluid flow. What about for you, Jen? Do you reckon your sort of identity as a thinker and researcher becomes in some way your family's identity as well, or how does that?
I think they have their own identity, but certainly my experience of being an academic has been shaped by also being a parent. My very first academic job, I was tutoring, and I started when I was about 3 months pregnant with my first child, and so she was born not long after the first semester of my teaching ended. And so whenever I think, how long have I been teaching for?
Yeah.
I know how long, because I know how old my daughter is. And so they've always been part of that journey with me. And it's interesting now because she's in first year at uni, and I teach first year, and so I'm getting some really interesting insights into the first year experience from her. But yeah, my marking assignments, you know, the weekends lost to marking assignments, the weekends lost to research. Yeah, there's a significant impact. Yeah, but I do, you know, what J.A. said, you know, about the flexibility being a really good thing. You know, my kids come after school and sit in my office and do their homework or don't do their homework, you know, while they're waiting for me to finish, and that kind of stuff's really good. You wouldn't have that in every workplace.
Yeah, it's true, isn't it?
Mm.
So did any of, I mean, I'm assuming that you did have the opportunity to have sort of career counselling in high school. Did anyone ever suggest an academic career to any of you?
No. No. I'm not sure I knew it was a thing. I'm not sure.
I nearly quit school in grade 12, and I only just passed grade 12. I actually thought I'd failed initially, and I got what was called a compensatory pass, I think it was called at that time. Yeah, there's, in fact, one of the grade 12 teachers, whatever, you know, told me that I really shouldn't be, you know, shouldn't be studying. I shouldn't be doing the things that I'm doing. And yeah, it was, not a good experience anyway. Mm.
Wow.
Yeah.
My mother wanted me to be a teacher, and you remember I'm older than all of you, and so I was a child growing up going to school in the 70s, and I was the first one that went to university where it was free. You know, viva golf,
Wow.
in my view,
Yeah.
whose wife was a social worker as well. But my mother wanted me to be a teacher. She said, oh, being a teacher is a really good thing, because when you have lots of children, you know, you get long holidays, you can work part-time. And I remember being absolutely horrified by the thought of being a teacher. But my inspiration actually came from television. I didn't have the words for it. I didn't have the words of social justice or human rights or inequality. And really the textbooks in social work didn't have them at that time either. And I started off doing law school because I was watching all the lawyers on television dealing with injustice and disadvantage. And I hated law. It was disgusting. And I found social work through the back door, looking for something to. I was street marching, and you know the Bellevue had been denigrated by those terrible demolition brothers, and you know Joe Bielke-Peterson was rampaging. I was in the streets, and I kind of found social work that way, because when I looked, it gave me that structure to challenge and to advocate and want to change. Yeah,
I think, my passion for social justice and the kind of core concepts and ideologies that run through public health came from similar things, as Nikki was saying, in terms of activism, which was different in the 90s. I was a 90s uni kid, but it was still alive and well back then. You know, we were still protesting. You know, the ISO and the DSP, the leftist groups were really active at UQ, and we were very much part of that. And I just remember a lot of the times we were at the pub after a rally, and the tin went around for the bail, and we had to bail out our friends who had ended up in the paddy wagon, and all those kinds of experiences were super cool in influencing how I think now and since then. But going back to Naomi's question in terms of where did the career idea come from, interestingly, and it was something I forgot about after it happened, but I sat in my very, very first lecture in psychology. I wasn't terribly interested in the content, and I was watching the lecturer, and I remember thinking, that's the coolest job I've ever seen. And I just thought, I'm going to do that. How can I do that? And then I kind of forgot about it, and then funnily enough, 15 years later, I went, oh yeah, that's right, that's what I wanted to do. Which is weird.
Interesting. It is the coolest job ever. And what about you, Dan? How'd you find your way here?
Well, I started out. I actually wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to be a history and English teacher, and so I went to uni. Went to country uni in Victoria in Gippsland, which, because of almost failing, was the only university that would probably accept me. But I chose to do that. I actually chose to move out of Melbourne and go down to Gippsland. And I did one of my first teaching rounds, and I found that I was more interested in what was happening for the young people who were sitting in the back of the classroom looking really disengaged. And it was coal mining country that I was working in. It was the Latrobe Valley. And so, and in the 1980s. And so they weren't really teaching, like kids weren't at school to go to university. You know, kids were at school passing time until they could go and work in the mines or whatever. And so I was much more interested in what was happening for them. And so I had a bit of an existential crisis and left and bummed around for a little bit, and then went back to that same university and did a human services course. Yeah.
Interesting. And so I'm going to put it to all three of you, because I'm really intrigued by your answer to this. I think there's a lot of focus on kind of hard skills in the workforce, but seems to me from my experience that the people who get along and who are most successful are the ones who maybe have some different skills. So what do you reckon are the personal qualities that you have that have led to your success in the academy?
Well, I think for me, humour.
Yes.
Humour helps. Patience, flexibility. I think for me, it's a really strong commitment to social justice, and that teaching and research is about justice doing. And I say that, and I model that in my practice. But then the other part is also just I have a real genuine passion for the teaching and learning process, you know, and positioning myself as both a teacher and a learner, you know, and students are also teachers and learners as well. I say to my students you know, when I'm introducing myself, that that I see my teaching as a paying it forward for all of the young people that I worked with who taught me so many incredible things. And so for me, I get to be part of this journey where I pass on some of that wisdom, and students come out with these mad skills that they get to use to help the next lot of people coming through. And for me, that's a real paying it forward. And I mean, I've been doing this for 19 years and I love it. And that passion is still there, you know, like every time I stand up in front of a class, I love it. I love it. And so I think that's part of it too. Yeah, for me.
Yeah, I'm a little teary now, I've got to say. I'm not even faking it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, and I mean it. I genuinely mean that. Yeah.
Yeah, I can hear that. That's why I'm getting tears. Nikki, what about you?
I was just thinking, I often, because of my role as course coordinator, it's a bit like the shepherd of the social work course students. And I often get a lot of students who come before me and they're concerned that they haven't done well, or they're struggling in their degrees. And I spent a lot of time over the last few years when I connect out in industry, asking practitioners, service providers, managers, what they look for in students when they graduate, what they're interested in social work and human services students. So going back to when I'm counselling these students, I can say to them with confidence what I think, backed up by the field. And what I say to them is, and these are the skills I think, is a service provider or a senior social worker at a hospital is not going to be interested in a GPA of 7. They're going to be interested in you and what you as a person bring, how you look and see and view the world, what your values are, what your moral and ethical compass is like. They're going to be interested in your curiosity, because we are curious as social workers. We are curious for different ways of understanding, different possibilities. We don't think about problems. We think about problems as opportunities for change. So I think how you view and see yourself in relation to the world is a beautiful gift, this critical reflexivity that we promote in students. So if a student gets just scrapes in a 4 and they're sitting in my office, I can say to them, they're going to be interested in you and how curious you are, whether you're a deep and respectful listener, whether you are open to learning and growing through life, and you can not worry about your GPA of 4 or 4.5, because they won't want the 7 perfect student, they'll want the real you. So I guess that's what I was kind of thinking about it as you were asking the question. Yeah.
Interesting. And can you just clarify for people who might not be completely sure what critical reflexivity is, because I know that it's a big focus of our social work.
Well, as soon as you see the word critical, you're thinking about power. You're thinking about power in terms of relationships and dynamics, and power is a very contested concept. It's very small p political. It's there are different versions of it. So when we talk about critical reflexivity, we're actually thinking about ourselves and our relationship and engagement with others, with people, with organisations, with societal values, etc. And when I think about critical reflexivity, how I teach it to the students, and it's something we share with nursing, and lawyers, strangely enough, are increasingly practicing critical reflexivity, which is good. But it's unique really to nursing and social work. So what we do is we sit and think about ourselves. It's a bit like pulling out a mirror, and I'm looking at myself and thinking about how I've responded to a situation or a person or a scenario or a lecture. But if I just look at myself, nothing changes. You put the mirror down and nothing changes. So what you do is it's a triangle. There's another connection. So what does knowledge say? What does experience say? What does the literature say? What deep listening? What are people telling me? What are their lived experiences? And how does that line up with me and how I engage, or what I think of myself, or what my values are? But then the third arm of the circle, of the triangle, which is so important, is change. what am I going to do? What am I going to shift or move or modify or keep a torch on? That's critical reflexivity. That's the cycle you go through, because social workers are very powerful. How we see and understand the world, the decisions we make, the reports, the labels we give people, the labels we take away from people, the communities we engage with, the legislation we contribute to change, to submissions we make. And we have to be deeply aware of who we are and what we bring, because we are not there for ourselves. We are there to serve the people.
Sounds like it's a bit of a superpower, to tell the truth.
It totally is.
What about you, Julianne? What do you think are the qualities that have brought you this far?
Well, I agree completely with what both Nikki and Jen said about the passion for the topic and the care for the students, 100%. But I think there's also the story prior to that is important as well, in terms of getting through the high degrees, getting through a PhD. I'm not going to lie, you've got to be a bit of a tough nut to get through some of the stuff, and resilience is important, and keeping your eye on, okay, I'm suffering now a little bit. And I think this is a useful thinking for even undergrads. Go, yeah, it's a little bit sucky because I'm losing my weekend and I haven't got money to go and do fancy things. But if you keep your eye on just ahead of you, something good is coming, and hang on to that and think, well, you know, I'm going to get to age 30. I think I was nearly 30 doing a PhD. And anyway, so what do I want that 30 to look like? Do I want it to look like me just here doing my thing, or do I want to have that PhD? So I always kind of look to the future. But then in terms of doing the actual, that's a personal reflection on getting there. But in terms of the, I always tend to say children, and that's terrible. They're not children, they're students, but I have so much care for them that sometimes that word seems almost right. But yeah, the passion for the topic, and it's that feeling of getting up in front of the lecture and suddenly getting that surge of, I remember why I care about this so much, and I can't wait to tell them, and I can't wait them to get excited about this as well. But I think the other thing I learned early, and perhaps the hard way, is when I first started, I was so self-conscious. I thought it's all about me doing public speaking and how will I look and what will they think of me. And I found the sooner I lost that baggage and focused on two things: one, the content; two, making the students comfy and relaxed in the classroom, that's when the good teaching started for me. And even because you can't always predict a classroom, and sometimes students will stay and do weird stuff, and you've got to be ready for it, and you've got to be relaxed and not panic.
Yeah.
And you know, you see the other students go, oh, you know, this person said this, how's she going to cope? And it's about going, okay, let's just chill and work with what they've said, and we'll get to a happy ending, hopefully.
I wonder,
yeah, it's a focus on the content of the student.
I wonder how you would have coped at me in my final year at university at UQ in social work, when I brought my dog to my lectures because I was having ideological challenges with the lecturer. It was Marxist social work. It very me now, and I was accused of having a cavalier attitude. Would you cope with me, with my dog, who was quite gorgeous?
I don't know. I've never had anyone bring an animal in, especially not as a form of protest. So I don't know. I don't know what I would have done with you, Nikki.
I think you should just get the T-shirt, Nikki. Cavalier.
Yeah.
Wear it. Own it.
Yeah.
So you've sort of touched on this a little bit in discussing your journey so far as academics and so forth, but I'm really interested to find out from you all why is knowledge production so important? It's something that we don't often talk about. You all said that no one actually recommended that you sort of go into careers in academia. So why is it so important that we continue to advance knowledge? Or is it even important? Maybe that's a kind of secondary question or primary question.
I think that
I'm going to wait for the others to speak, because this is quite a contentious area.
I think that for me, I think we're told such a limited version of the truth about any issue, and usually that version of the truth is something that's spoken about by people in power in order to maintain their power. And so critical knowledge, critical research tries to challenge those truths, it tries to challenge those hegemonic ideas. You know, I think social change happens when people are taught to see the world differently, you know, and that's taught to understand the power of some of those dominant discourses, but also taught to and supported to work through some of the ways that we might also be complicit in oppression. You know, so some of the ways that our thinking actually is also problematic, because we've just taken on all those dominant discourses without really thinking about it. And so for me, knowledge production, you know, teaching and research is part of that really important process. Look at what's happening in the US now. So we've got social action happening, which is really important. But at the same time, we've got researchers being interviewed to do the analysis as well. And so we've got action and we've got research. And the two combined are really powerful forces for change. And you know, and I think, yeah, that's why I do it. Action and research, you know, and teaching and research are justice doing, you know, it's part of justice doing. So for me, that's why knowledge production and teaching is important. Yeah.
What about for you, JA? We'll get to Nikki last.
Yeah. I think similar to what Jen was saying. And for me, it's about, you know, looking at the way the world is, looking at the way knowledge sits, or even if it comes down to the more micro perspective of reading a paper, if you're just happy with what you've read and happy with what you've seen and go, yep, that seems legit, looks good enough to me, and you're happy to walk away, well then good on you, but nothing will ever change and nothing will ever improve. And it's about, I think you have to be critical if you want things to improve, and in order for that to happen, you have to have people driving new knowledge and new research. You know, you can either sit in it and go, seems good enough, who cares kind of attitude. Once you move out of that and go, actually I care and I don't like it and I'm quite cross about it, actually I'd like a whole better world for other people, maybe especially these people, they look like they're having a crap time. If you want things to improve, you have to dig for them. How can we do this better? And that can be a really intellectual kind of more wanky thing, like fighting over methodologies, or it can be, you know, activism and driving for political change. It's about change and improvement.
What about you, Nick?
I think there's a very big debate around social work and knowledge. And I don't like binaries. I detest the simplistic and reductionist nature of binaries, but there are kind of a couple of camps on a continuum. There are those who say, you know, we are ascribing to the grand narrative of medicine and the power it has over research and literature. You only have to look at, you know, Q1, the top ranked journals. That right at the top there are the medical journals, the Lancet, the New England Journal of Medicine sits up there. So you have evidence-based practice. So that, you know, that therefore goes down the avenue of saying there is a right answer, there is a scientific answer, it's the pathologization of the human condition, etc., etc. So there's a big debate about, you know, how social work fits in that space, you know, our paradigms, our lenses, our approaches, our methodologies. For me, it's one of the reasons my PhD is actually in epidemiology. I started off as a mixed methods researcher, and I have abandoned quantitative research, so stats and biostatistics and SPSS and number crunching and databases. And I'm a qualitative researcher. I'm interested in deep and meaningful exploration of lived experiences, you know, the privilege of giving voice and agency to or co-developing methodologies. Now, that's, you know, that's a different approach, and it's not evidence-based practice. I think it's evidence-informed practice. So it's kind of down that continuum. But then you have a whole group of social workers who are dead against that. They say we shouldn't be in that space. We should be in the doing space. We should have our sleeves rolled up and out there doing what we're supposed to do. You know, at the heart of practice is, as we've talked about, social justice, human rights, professional integrity, and you can't do that writing an article. You can't do that interviewing 20 people with in-depth interviews. So I think it's a very interesting space to be in. I think there is no doubt that social work, if it wants to be a significant change agent in modern society, that's why many social workers are now active in the formal research space and wanting to use that. But there is also a lot of room, I think, for knowledge creation to be down there locally in the community, you know, with just, you know, Joe blogs, you know, working with the community. It doesn't matter whether social worker or community constituent or whatever the label is, it's doing and being with that community. So I think it's a whole spectrum of issues, but it is pretty contentious, really, and academia gets caught in that because we're judged on how much research we do. We're judged on the journals we publish in. You know, I have a passion for teaching, but I must do my research as well, or I can't have my passion for teaching. So it's a contentious area. Yeah.
So we've kind of touched on the idea that we're in quite tumultuous times at the moment. Jen's kind of spoke to that a little bit. Any big ideas? Like, what's your big idea for moving through this, or somehow changing some of the injustices that have occurred for a really long time, but it seem to be now being brought a bit more to light? And I say that very cautiously, but so Julianne, any ideas? What's your big idea?
Wow, it's a big question. I think
I have faith in you all.
Yeah, that's a hard one. I think at the base, not to oversimplify it, but really the central tenet of what we're looking at now is power and power differences, and we see that it's just a useful kind of analytical tool for me to think about COVID and how that's not affecting people equally around the world. We see bad things happen, but we don't see them happen evenly. And, you know, nothing seems fair because we've already got these incredible inequalities within and between countries. And then when something like COVID hits, we see those inequalities become glaringly obvious. And in some ways it can be useful because it makes us realize we can't hide anymore. You know, it's the same like when we have natural disasters, or Hurricane Katrina really exposed poverty in America, and COVID's now really exposing the US in many interesting ways, but also how developing countries are dealing with the epidemic differently and suffering, I guess, more harshly. But also looking at, you know, the riots in America now, the same thing underpins that is, you know, it's a power struggle. It's been going on for so long. And as terrible as everything seems right now, I guess my optimistic lens would say this might just be the tipping point at which we finally see some of these power structures dismantled, and maybe this is it. This is enough is enough. And we see that through disease, through riots, through different kinds of struggle. I'm optimistic somewhat that we come out of this social unrest and through this pandemic with a slightly better and more just and more equal and more compassionate view of how we share this world together. And this idea that this is it, this is all we got, it's one little earth, we're all balancing on it. Maybe we could just stop being so divisive.
Okay,
that's it.
George Monbiot wrote an article in The Guardian saying that that all the apocalypse kind of horror movies always say that the worst of people is going to come out in the face of these apocalypses, but that's actually proven to be untrue in this pandemic. Apart from, you know, stealing toilet paper off shelves and those, you know, those kind of things, but mainly we've turned to each other, we've turned to community, we've recognised the hard work that ordinary people are doing. Governments, neoliberalism's failing, you know, like that's been demonstrated. The pandemic's really, you know, ripped the idea of neoliberalism and striving for individual gain. It's just ripped that apart. and so you know, I think we can't have a snap back to what it was. You know, there can't be that. We can't go back to precarious employment for young people. You know, we need safe, secure, affordable housing for the housing crisis that's yet to emerge. You know, like, and that's then going to help the building industry. You know, hello, ScoMo and his ridiculous plan for his rich mates. But anyway, you know, we need a basic income. If we had a basic income, then we wouldn't have needed JobKeeper, because everyone would have, those jobs still would have disappeared, but everyone would have had an income so people could survive. We need social security benefits that actually reflect the true cost of living. And so, and for all of those things to happen, we need an ideological shift, you know, and that takes work. You know, that takes work. And we've just got to hope that that maybe we are on the brink. You know, maybe this is a time. I'm hopeful. I'm ever hopeful. You got to be hopeful, don't you? Yeah.
Yeah, you do. What about you, Nikki? Anything to add?
I was just thinking that you said I should have a T-shirt with Cavalier on it. Well, if I have that on the front, then on the back I must have capitalism has failed, because that's the one thing that is absolutely clear to me from COVID is capitalism has failed. And you know, our social obligations have come out, you know, and people say, oh, you're such a my kids say, you're such a lefty mum, you know, you're a communist, you're a socialist. I don't care what you call me, I really don't. But what I know is our social obligations have really been so evidently flawed. You know, that, you know, people not being able to pay their electricity bill.
Yeah.
Pensioners having enough money to have a house but no money for food or petrol. You know, for me, there are certain basics in life that should, I mean, you know, Sir Michael Marmot and his social determinants of health, he articulated this so well, 15 years ago in that report. Basic, he didn't call it basic income, you know, free housing, electricity, power, transport, postal should be run as NGOs at no cost for the benefit. You know, so we know that we all share that ideology and philosophy. One thing I hope from this virus, this pandemic, is that people slow down. That I think we are all moving so quickly through this world. We think in shorthand. We're very reductionist. Many people choose not to see, you know, Petronius, a fantastic philosopher and, you know, ideologue from, you know, eons ago, he said the world wants to be deceived, so let it be deceived. So I hope if we, you know, people would rather see the mistruths or not see really the reality of what we're dealing with. We do public health social work, we see the reality. So I would hope that people slow down and open their eyes and see that their neighbour living next door to them, you know, the electricity's turned off, that, you know, the neighbours with that young woman who died with cerebral palsy stuck in her chair, you know, that people would see that, you know, that reducing postal services, think more deeply about what that really means for people living rurally in country areas. Yeah, so social obligations and slowing down. And, you know, please don't vote for ScoMo. Please don't vote for Trump. Please don't vote for Bolsonaro. Yeah, Bolsonaro in Brazil, where, you know, #1 death rate in the world. Hello, stop being so selfish and let's have a social conscience.
Thanks for lots of big ideas there, not just 3, and really great to hear them. I'm going to end with this because I'm actually being quite selfish here in asking this question, because I really want to know from 3 people I admire a lot on what would you have done differently? One thing that you would have changed along the way that you think would have been a benefit to you or to the people you work with?
Everyone's waiting for someone else to go first.
I'll be quick.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's linked to feminism. because I went to university in the 80s. I embraced feminism with absolute, you know, in terms of my marriage, my relationships, my values. It's about equality, gender equality. However, what I did is I put a superwoman cape on, and I could not say no. And then for the one thing I would change, and this is the academic in me coming out, is when I was finishing off my PhD, I was working full time and I had 5 children, and I was still home cooking meals, doing my own cleaning, doing the sports run on weekend, and my health suffered as a consequence, my physical health. So I now say to all my PhD or higher degree research students, do not work full time. Learn to say no, carve out space for yourself, and self-care.
It's a great saying, just because women can do anything doesn't mean we have to do everything.
Absolutely.
My back's going last. I got to think about this.
Okay. I think I've got 2 things. One is I would have got my PhD sooner. I started it, and life, you know, all the stories, enough, you know, stories that I'm not going to go into, meant that I don't have a PhD, which leaves me feeling a bit vulnerable sometimes, particularly now in, you know, the way the university sector's unraveling a little. And it also, I just think academia, there's a certain kudos with being able to put doctor in front of your name, and I walk up and down the hallway and I see that my name on the door is the one without doctor in front of it. So there's that, you know. But I also think, you know, one of the things that, you know, I'm on a mission to queer social work and human services, and I would have started that mission sooner. I would have been more, I mean, I've always been outspoken in that space, in my direct practice life, in my personal life, obviously, and in my teaching life, but actually kind of standing up and trying to change curriculum and trying to change, using my research to change some of those ideas, some of the ways that social work and human services still has a really long journey to take in terms of being truly inclusive in the queer space. There's a long journey to go there, and so I've started, you know, I'm on that path, I'm on that journey now. So yeah, which also links to my PhD as well.
I was going to say, maybe we could do the 2 together.
Yeah, well, that is, you know, that is you know, the one, yeah.
And Julianne?
It's a really tough one, because you kind of done things the way you've done them, and you go, oh, I don't really know. I haven't lived that parallel hypothetical other me life that could have gone. I do wonder though, because I think I did things very, very arse about in terms of the the normal trajectory.
We wouldn't swear today.
Sorry?
We all promised we wouldn't swear today.
Oh, sorry. Is that a rude word? It's so naughty. Yeah, so it was bottom about, and yeah, so I had kids, and then I got married, and then I had a career, and I don't know if that was necessarily the smartest way to do it. It was kind of the way things went for me. You know, I think, oh well, maybe it would have been easy if I'd done the career bit first and gotten on my feet more, and maybe wouldn't have struggled with this, and maybe this would have been easier. But I think a lot of that is just hypothetical, and maybe it just is hard, all of it, no matter what order you do it in. Maybe it's tricky even if you start with a career. I don't know. I only know what I've lived, and yeah, I can sit back and moan about the tough times and how maybe I should have done things a bit more conventionally and might have been easier, but I'm not sure. So I'm going to say no regrets. Lots of mistakes, you know, but no regrets. Perhaps if anything, I've learned to be more patient. I was an incredibly impatient young person, and I still am to some extent. So just chilling out a bit. It's good.
Well, I think that no regrets is a good note to end this conversation on. It's been absolutely delightful to chat with you all this morning, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart. I love you all, and thank you so much for sharing your experiences and your memories, and hopefully people watching have enjoyed this as well. See you all in the halls.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
See ya.
Thank you. Bye-bye.